Hello friends and colleagues, my name is Charles Buck and I'm a 35-year standing practitioner, author and educator in the field of Chinese medicine. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about the extent of modern usage of Chinese medicine and to present you some, I think, quite surprising insights into this medicine in the modern world. And this comes out of a session that I presented in 2019 at a conference in Lampeter University in Wales in Great Britain, which was to Western medical herbalists, and I was giving them some overview of the world usage of Chinese medicine, or herbal medicine in particular. This is a section. This is the first section of my presentation, and I'm going to later present you with another section, the middle section, and then a later section that goes into the details of how Chinese medicine doctors think. But today, on this session, we're just going to look at some statistics. We're going to be doing some scoping of the usage and application of Chinese medicine in the modern world today. So in this session we're going to discover some surprising statistics. We're going to see how Chinese medicine thrives in a modern hospital environment in many countries in the world and contributes to modern healthcare. One of the triggers to my collecting this statistical information was when I read a double-page article in an English newspaper, the Daily Mail, by a journalist called John Diamond, who sadly at that time, in around 2001, was in the terminal stages of cancer. And he was very much against the use of complementary medicine approaches in cancer care, and he particularly focused on Chinese medicine. And what he said was, as the headline for his article, was a double-page spread in this newspaper, was, "If Chinese medicine is so good, why don't the Chinese use it?" Interesting question, because I always imagined that Chinese medicine was quite heavily used in China, and certainly that was my experience when I went there. So I began to collect statistics on this just to see what the truth of the matter was. So this is the hospital that I studied at and did a clinical internment at in 1990 in Shanghai. They've actually rebuilt the hospital since I was there. This is the modern version of it, and this is a hospital of traditional Chinese medicine where the treatments are acupuncture, Chinese herbal medicine, some special forms of massage, Chinese massage called Tui Na. And this has also got an inpatient facility, I think of about 600 beds. It was established in 1906 and has grown so large that they now have a sister hospital on the other side of the river. So this is the hospital I was at in Shanghai in 1990. And even at that time they had, alongside the Chinese pharmacies and the Chinese medicine and the herbal medicines and what have you, they also used Western medicine diagnostics. They had body scanners, they had gastroscopy units, they had lab facilities and what have you that you would see in a modern Western hospital, except that the treatment was primarily traditional Chinese medicine. So this is the Shuguang Hospital, a very famous hospital in Shanghai. When we look across the whole of China, we find that there are actually about 4,000 hospitals, major teaching hospitals like this, which are as big as our teaching hospitals in the Western world. And I think in the UK we have something like 150 hospitals serving the population's needs here. So 4,000 large teaching hospitals spread across China. And in addition to the hospital-based practice of Chinese medicine, we find that there are 42,528 regional clinics, smaller clinics and clinical facilities using Chinese medicine as their primary approach. And also they have biomedicine, Western medicine hospitals in China as well, and they have something like 20,000 of those. But they too, 90% of them have traditional Chinese medicine departments where they will deliver acupuncture or Chinese herbal medicine or what have you, perhaps on a smaller scale than you would get in a traditional Chinese medicine hospital. And I should say that these statistics have been collected over a period of time, over a period of something like 20 years. So they're not all statistics of this moment. Some are quite recent statistics, and I've indicated that on my slides where I could. And some are perhaps from 5 years ago or 10 years ago or whatever. So really I'm kind of trying to create an impression of the scope of usage in China itself. Of this medicine. So we have 4,000 hospitals delivering Chinese medicine across China. And this has grown year on year. This is not a shrinking medical tradition. Here's a graph of the growth in the number of hospitals in China, traditional Chinese medicine hospitals in China, from 1987 to 2017 actually. So the 4,000 figure was the figure I think for 2018 or 2019. So you can see that this medicine has grown in popularity and grown in government support over that time. So this service as a whole, when we look globally across the whole of China, we'll find that each year the traditional Chinese medicine service treats about 416 million people. That's not treatments, that's 416 million people. So that's not something that we would call fringe medicine or something that's just on the margins of modern medicine. This is a major contribution to the healthcare of people in China. And again, the number of people treated goes up year on year, the number of people treated by this medicine. So when we look at 2002, the figure was something like 200 million, rising to about 400 million in 2012. So it's been going on year on year. I would guess that it's something in the region of 450 million today, this year. So that's not insignificant. And when we look at the people who are employed to deliver this medicine, this isn't delivered in a health food shop, or this isn't amateur medicine. This is delivered by doctors with an initial training in Chinese medicine of 5 years is their basic training, of which roughly half that time is spent studying biomedicine. So they learn the standard biomedical tests, how to read blood scans and blood tests, x-rays and what have you. And in 2015, this is for, there were 452,000 Chinese medicine doctors working in the hospital system in China, having completed that 5-year training. Beyond that, there are also lower grade people delivering medical services. There are people with 3-year bachelor's degrees, for example, who only maybe deliver acupuncture or twin arm massage or what have you. And these practitioners train in medical universities. And there are 28 medical universities across China turning out these graduates of this medicine. So, of course, as well as the actual physicians on the clinical coalface, so to speak, we also have all the background, all the back professions that support that. So, for example, in China, you can go to university. It's very common to go to university and do a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, in fact, in Chinese medicine pharmacy, so that you train how to identify the herbs, how to make up prescriptions, how to make creams and what have you. So those are the people who operate the pharmacies in the hospitals, or also in the wider outside world. And then, of course, there are other people who are academics and researchers. In 1987, this is an old statistic, I think the figure will have gone up again on this too, but there were something like 70,000 postdoctoral Chinese medicine researchers working in China. These are people who've done their PhDs and who are researching the pharmacology of Chinese herbs, or who are researching acupuncture or the other aspects of Chinese medicine. 70,000 postdoctoral researchers. And then, so we've talked about China a little bit, but we can say that across Southeast Asia, the Chinese medicine has the same kind of following on the whole. So we'll find large-scale usage of Chinese medicine, acupuncture, Chinese herbal medicine in hospitals in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Vietnam. And in these countries, of course, this is considered a normal healthcare choice. In the recent COVID-19 epidemic, for example, this medicine will have been used to support those patients admitted to hospital with coronavirus infections. And as we speak, there are roughly 300 registered trials in China of Chinese medicine for COVID patients. So this is I'm trying to give you some dimensions of this medicine that we don't get in the normal media coverage of traditional Chinese medicine and Chinese herbal medicine. So, of course, there's an academic structure. There are professors, there are doctors, there are all different grades of academics. There are authors of this medicine. And something around 100 regular professional journals. These are national journals, many of them. Some of them are regional journals, or journals just distributed to the Chinese medicine community in particular cities. And there are about 15 of these are considered core journals that have a circulation of 30,000 or more. Now, these days, of course, it's more difficult to measure the circulations of journals because most of them are made available online. So in the days when there was only paper copies and you could count how many paper copies were being printed and distributed, we would find that the circulations of these journals were mind-boggling. As big or bigger than the circulations of the major medical journals on medicine in the West. So the journal Zhongguo Zhenzhou, China's Acupuncture and Moxibustion journal had in 2008 a circulation of 400,000. Zhongyi Jiazhe, the Chinese medical journal, had a circulation of 183,000 per month, and even the local Shandong Chinese medicine journal had a circulation of 303,000 per year in 2008. So this is a whole academic structure supporting this medicine of the medical professionals who practice this medicine. So the content of these journals is also mixed. It includes clinical trials. It includes clinical audit studies, where you simply count heads really in hospitals with particular conditions, how many people seem to improve and how many people didn't seem to improve, and those sorts of things. That, of course, isn't a randomized controlled trial. Roughly 5% of the published clinical trials would count today in the modern West as being randomized clinically controlled trials, i.e. gold standard trials. So a lot of the information is really more of a form of clinical audit than anything. They're not trying to prove this works, they're simply trying to improve the medicine and make it better. Of course, as well as the actual clinical studies, there are pharmacological studies that have researched into Chinese medicine, into Chinese herbs, for example. Also on the mechanisms of acupuncture as well. So there are something like 300,000 published papers on Chinese herbs. And so if you were to go on the world's main research database for medicine, you can search any Chinese herb and find a significant literature body on the pharmacology of these things. So they have been studied both in terms of what they do to human physiology and also what the toxicology might be as well. The journals also include case histories, and they include discussions on diagnostic aspects, on Chinese medicine theory, on Chinese medicine history, and that sort of thing. So there's a whole world out there of professional medical practice on the field of Chinese medicine in general. When we look at publication statistics, here's a slide of papers published in different fields of Chinese medicine, and so you can see from this that there was something like 28,000 published papers on acupuncture, some on dietary therapy, some on Tai Chi and cupping, and all the small numbers on those. But when we look at the number of published papers in, this would be 2000 and I can't see what year that is. 2007, actually, this was the number of studies that have been published on Chinese herbs at that time was 241,237. So again, that's not an insignificant evidence base. So we can say that there's tons of research for any condition. If you could access the Chinese journals and pick a medical condition, you would find a whole load of literature. It would be difficult to read it all. But if we just take one example, if we take the example of miscarriage, the use of Chinese medicine, traditional Chinese medicine in the treatment of miscarriage, when I looked into this in 2013, I found that there were 96 papers published on acupuncture and miscarriage and 1,444 studies on Chinese herbal medicine and miscarriage. So, and we could pick almost any medical condition and find a similar kind of literature base. Well, similarly, when we look at the pharmacology of Chinese herbs, and we go on PubMed, the World Research Database, we will find something like, you can pick any herb. If we just pick one herb, if we pick Danshen, for example, or Salvia miltiorhizae, and we do a search for that on the PubMed, the medical database, it turns up, or when I did a search on this for the conference last year, it turned up 2,742 studies onto that herb. So again, that's a considerable amount of research effort has gone in to validating this medicine and researching its safety and efficacy. So a few years ago, the government in the UK decided that it would be a good thing to just look into herbal medicines and see whether there was a case for a state regulation of herbal medicines. And so the deputy head of healthcare in the UK, in medicine in the UK, was asked to look into it and chair a panel looking into herbal medicine, and his conclusion was, this was David Walker, who was the chair of the UK parliamentary panel on herbal medicine, said in his report at the end of this in 2014, there is no evidence for herbal medicine. So that's interesting, an interesting difference of viewpoint there, where a person can be charged with looking into it, and I can find tens of thousands of studies of all sorts into herbal medicine, and the chair of a parliamentary panel can't find any. Surprising, really. So let me just look a little bit at some statistics on the actual herbs themselves. So these are this is the use of Chinese herbs in China and the cultivation of them. So here we have a picture of herb growing fields in the foreground. This is a Chinese herb called Yin Yang Huo, which again has had quite a lot of pharmacology done on it, in 1987, again, I'm sorry, this is a few years out of date, the figure again will have gone up significantly since then, but in 1987, when I found figures on this, I found that there were 660,000 acres of China under herb cultivation. And at that time there was something like 1.25 million tonnes of Chinese herbs produced every year, and 240,000 tonnes were exported annually. Again, the figure has just gone up year on year. I'm not sure what the more recent figures on that are. So, and these substances, these medicinal herbs, get grown professionally by experts in their growth. Particular regions of China would be famous for growing particular herbs because the conditions are ideal for particular herbs in different regions. And these are then brought to market in tonnage quantities and sold to buyers who work for the Chinese Health Service, for the Chinese government, but also international buyers who are buying for the Taiwanese market or the Hong Kong market, the Singapore market, the European market or the American market. So these are specialist buyers who are buying tons, if not hundreds of tons of Chinese herbs. So here is an illustration of Bozhou herb market in China. Bozhou has one of the largest wholesale Chinese herb markets in China, and what you see is there's just a small part of it here. In total, the herb market in Bozhou has 85 acres of trading space. So that's a lot. That's, I don't know, 25, 30 hectares of people dealing in herbs wholesale. About 6,000 tons a day are sold to around 50,000 buyers. And as you can imagine, a ton of herbs is a lorry load. So 6,000 tons a day. And this is the market that I believe is open 6 days a week, selling 6,000 tons of medicinal Chinese herbs a day. And in 2012, that market was worth 36.8 billion euros. So this is not, this is quite a significant activity. So in conclusion, this is a significant form of medicine that's used across the world and support in a hospital-based setting by trained professionals. And this isn't always the picture that you get from journalists in the press or from media or from people who perhaps have an agenda wishing to keep Chinese medicine back. So I hope you've enjoyed this session. I'm going to be recording a second part which talks about the way that Chinese medicine managed to survive in the face of the onslaught of modern pharmacological medicine. And I'm not saying that one's better than the other. I mean, we both have their strengths and their weaknesses. So that will be part 2. And in part 3, I want to go into some detail, trying to explain how this medicine works, what's going on in people's minds, in Chinese medicine physicians' minds, why it's different and why it's valuable or makes a valuable contribution to healthcare in the modern world. So that's what we're going to be talking about there. That's really going to be a very different presentation. I'm not going to be talking about yin and yang or about pulse diagnosis or other things. I'm going to be talking about a deeper level of the actual way that Chinese medicine Chinese medicine physicians think, and why this is interesting and why this is valuable in the modern world. So I hope you've enjoyed and got something out of my presentation today, and I hope you'll join me in part 2 and part 3 of this session, and also in the other videos that I'm going to be producing over the next year or two that aim to explain the realities of Chinese medicine from somebody who's been an insider in that world for close on 40 years and has been involved in teaching and researching and exploring this amazing medical tradition that we still have alive today. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.